Hi, everybody. It's Helen Patterson, Life Works Well. And I have to say, I can't believe it's the last day of November and that we only have one more month of the year after this. And I've had a bit of a week. The last week has been a bit crazy. I've had so much going on and technical difficulties. My other laptop crashed. And we realize how much we're reliant on technology. So I don't have all my PowerPoint things and all my stats that I usually do with my introductions, but so we're probably just going to dive right in. And as you know, this month we have been focusing on financial acumen. It's Financial Literacy Month up here in Canada. And we had a guest earlier this month, and I'm so excited today because we have Louise Stevenson, who joined us last month and was talking a lot about the market update and what was happening around the election and just, everything finances in this pandemic. And so Louise is, so excited to have Louise back again. Louise is today going to talk about women and wealth. So I'm very excited because, as you know, we have a lot of women entrepreneurs that come on the mentor circles. We have young professionals. So we never know who's going to show up. And we just feel that, having financial wealth and understanding about it and having the ability to manage your finances really is part of really holistic well-being. So I think it's really important, and it's been taboo. So Louise, for those of you who might have been here last time, and if not, you're watching the recording later, or you haven't met her yet, Louise is an investment advisor, and she has a wealth of knowledge about finances. She helps with financial planning, really many people how to invest, when to start investing. She works with RBC Dominion Securities, but she also is very passionate about supporting women as well. So I'm so glad to have you today, Louise. And if you want to add anything about your background, feel free. Today, we're going to really just dive into, you have a great presentation planned, and we can open it up for questions later as well. I know there were a few other people that might join, and if not, they will watch a recording later.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Helen. Delighted to be here. So yes, as Helen mentioned, I am an investment advisor with RBC Dominion Securities. I run a wealth management practice. And yes, I do work with a lot of business owners, including some female business owners, and with families to ensure that they're really confident in their overall wealth management strategies. So really happy to be here, and I'm hoping today to really focus on some of the unique challenges that women face with respect to their investments, and just also share some very practical tips of things that one can do to really get started. So in terms of an agenda, I wanted to talk about and share some statistics in terms of what's happening specifically with women's growing economic power, and share some of the unique challenges we face. There is sadly continues to be a bit of an earning gap. We do live longer, and there are life events which happen to everybody, but they do have a unique impact to women. And then share some information about some of the challenges we face as caregivers. So I like to say I'm a card-carrying member of the sandwich generation. I am the mother of two teenage girls. I would usually say active, but in COVID, they're not quite as active as they've been in the past. But two teenage girls, and I have a lovely father who unfortunately suffers from dementia. And I wanted to talk specifically about 5 things you can do to get started today. So, the first thing I'm going to share with you is, taking an inventory and understanding your net worth, and I'll explain what that means and how you can measure that. Talking about the importance of setting goals and some of the key things you need to do about goal setting with respect to your finances. I'm going to talk about education. Financial literacy is a passion of mine, and share some tips in terms of how you can become more literate. Talk a little bit about, developing a financial plan, and, the importance in some of the things you can do in terms of asking for help. And then for anybody that's interested, I'm more than happy to share an update in terms of what we see happening with respect to the markets, because they've been a little volatile. I'll give you that. So in terms of, my story, so if you can move it to the next slide, please, Helen. I think it's always interesting to understand the why. Like, I always say to people, what's your why? And so my why, in terms of why I do what I do, is because I feel that only 17% of investment advisors in Canada are women. And one of the things, and I'll share some statistics about this in a minute, but one of the things that we do find amongst women is that they struggle to find someone with whom they really want to work with and they can connect to. And not to say that men can't do a great job, but I think that it does have an impact. Today, and I actually just posted this on LinkedIn, there was an interesting article that spoke about the fact that, women get significantly less venture capital funding. But part of that is, there's a statistic that was in that article about how women are asked questions which tend to be about, can you really do this? Like all the negative things. Whereas men, the questions they get asked are disproportionately around how big do you think you're going to get? So, I think part of this, it's very systemic, and I think part of this is just really changing the narrative. And if I can do my little part in helping to do that, that's my why.
That's amazing.
In terms of women's growing economic power, we've known this for a long time, but, it's kind of curious as to why we are where we are today, because, a disproportionate number of women are graduates from university. 60% of women have a university degree, and almost 40% go on to get a graduate degree. And even more importantly, what makes it more important is that 31% of women are the main breadwinners in their family, and that statistic is actually growing. So this need for us to be real stewards of our finances, I think, is critical, and I think some of these data points underline some of that. So then, in terms of the next slide, how do we differ when it comes to investing? Some of these stats may be attributed to some of the challenges that women face, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But it's really interesting that a disproportionate of 60% of women don't have a financial plan, and at some point, because again of the fact that we live longer and there's some other reasons, but 90% of us will at some point be required to be the sole decision maker in our family's financial future. But a large proportion of women cannot find someone with whom they can really connect and feel that they really want to work with. So those are just some of the challenges and differences that we have. So what are some of those unique challenges? So there's really three that I'm going to touch on today. The first is the earnings gap, which you can't believe at this day and age still exists, but it does. We live longer. There are some life events that happen to all of us, but they have a unique impact to women. And specifically want to share some stats around some of our responsibilities with respect to caregiving. So in terms of the earnings gap, for every dollar that men earn, women earn 74 cents. Hard to believe in this day and age that that's still the case, but it is. And that, as you can imagine, over the long term can have a really big impact in terms of the amount of wealth. So it impacts us in terms of the wealth we can accumulate, but it also each year has an impact in terms of how much, for example, we can contribute to RSPs. Because if you don't earn as much, you may not reach the maximum in terms of the contribution room. So it really does have a significant impact. There's also, because of some of the responsibilities that we have in terms of some of our caregiving, that we may be more likely to take on a part-time job, which again impacts our lifelong earnings. And yet at the same time, we're going to live, 10 to 15 years longer in some cases than our spouse. So all really important facts that impact the earnings gap. So what are some of those life events? So, not only do we have this, longer life expectancy, but, and of course we marry men and women, but, marriage happens to everybody or a lot of people. But what is unique to women is, our role as mothers means that we do often step out of the workforce for a period of time. And it's interesting when I look at, some of the tools that are typically used to do some financial planning, they don't include some of those data points where we step out and step back in and step out and step back in, depending on how many children we have. Sadly, I think divorce and separation can have and will have a significant impact on our lives. This is actually, sadly, I'm seeing a very sad side effect right now of COVID. I think this is taking its toll on all of us, and it's certainly, sadly, taking its toll on relationships. But that, for women, may mean disruption in a stream of income. And it's sometimes because we haven't taken on the role of being actively involved in the management of our finances, also means now we're thrown into caring and worrying about something that we haven't taken the time, and we may not, in terms of knowing really what's going on in our family. And again, sadly, I have worked with women who have been in a situation where they have gone through or are going through a separation, and it's been made more difficult because they really didn't have a solid understanding of their family finances. And there's been sadly, some aha moments with respect to that. And then finally, we talked about, at some point, when one loses one's partner, it can also create a different set of unique challenges. And again, making sure that we have the finances. And, a higher percentage of women end up in poverty than do men as seniors. And this is in part because we haven't, I think, throughout this trajectory of our lives, taken an active role in managing our family's finances.
Yeah. Louise, I hope you don't mind if I just ask you a quick question here.
Yeah.
Because I know you and I have spoken about this a few times, just personally, that, and you may touch on this later, so many of us never really think about all these life events until they happen to us. And so I guess that's the whole, discussion today about how, you can start to prepare younger. And one of the examples we've talked about, we both have a bit of similar background where we're sandwich generation, and, you have the kids and then you have the elder care. And my mother, who has dementia, didn't have a lot of savings. And then even, when my dad passed away, like, I've gone through all of these experiences. And it's interesting because the death of a partner was actually my dad, where I realized he didn't have a will. And then trying to sort all that out, then trying to sort out what my mom, anything, life insurance that he may have had. Like, I learned from that experience on how to be organized. And then, so many times, like the historic traditional roles where this primary earner was taking care of everything. And my mom, raised 5 kids. She did work part-time, and she worked for 25 years with the Bay, but she had no idea, right? So no support. So I guess the lesson learned is like, so when you think about this, and you may cover this off, is like, what is the advice you'd give to people? Like, not, some people here may not even be married yet, or have a significant partner. What do you recommend as you kind of start to think about it proactively?
Well, I think one of and I'll touch on this when I go through my 5 key tips, but one of those aspects is having a financial plan and having a written financial plan. And so that's step A. But I think what's more important is actually monitoring that on an annual basis. And that's, I think, more often the piece that gets missed. So, you spoke about life events. So if you know that, and it depends on your age, right? So maybe in 2 years you say, you know, my short-term plan is I'm getting married, and my medium-term plan to happen in the next 1 to 5 years is we're hoping to buy a house, and then, you know, we want to start making sure that we're maxing out our RSP every year. So for, you know, that would be a plan for a young person who is just starting out. So you can imagine then one needs to then put a plan in place or provisions in place to make sure that you're actually achieving those goals. So, you know, how are you going to pay for that wedding? And is that going to, do you have the sufficient funds in the short term to be able to pay for it? And if you don't, are you going to be actually pulling money out that you intended for either the down payment for your home, or even more importantly, your retirement? Are you not going to contribute to stop your RSP contributions because, oh my gosh, we've got this, we want to put a down payment for a house, just using that as an example. So first thing is having it documented, knowing how you're going to fund those goals. And then thirdly, monitoring them on a regular basis, because things do change. So often when I start working with clients that are new to me, one of the first questions I ask is around, you know, when was the last time you updated your will? And I'm always happy when I hear recently, but it's very shocking to me the number of people with whom I meet that haven't done that, and that haven't, either they may have the will, but it, you know, was maybe put in place when their children are really young, and now they're adults, and therefore if something happened to both of their parents as adults, for example, they would be entitled to the proceeds of the estate. And unless there's been, you know, you don't want to necessarily hand the keys to whatever those assets are to your children, you know, getting a lot of money when you're in your early 20s is, I don't think, a good idea for anybody necessarily. So, you know, making sure that you update your will to make sure that those provisions are in place so that they happen, those assets are distributed at a time, maybe if that's something that you want, in chunks that make sense to you and your spouse. So yeah, those are just some of the examples, but just getting back to your question about I think it's the planning is the most important, and having, you know, the source of funds, so knowing how you're going to fund those goals. And thirdly, making sure you're monitoring them, because like divorce is not something any of us really plan for when we get married, but it does happen. And that's the point in time where you really need to sit down and meet with your advisor and have a different conversation.
Yeah, and that's great. Like thinking about my daughter who's in university, just starting, you know, within the last couple of years, filing taxes, and you know, we had that chat recently about contributions to RSPs. I said, I didn't have that advice growing up. Like, just start, you're lucky, you know, but a lot of people don't think about it. You know, they think about.
Yeah, and I'll share a very concrete example of the power of compounding interest, because it's an amazing thing. So but in terms of the next slide, you know, one of the other, we talked a bit, both you and I, Helen, have experienced this firsthand in terms of caregiving. So our caregiving shifts, you know, maybe when we're younger to, you know, being caregivers of our children, but that can often then evolve into being part of what is called the sandwich generation. And what we're actually finding is that sandwich generations, we're getting double-decker sandwiches. So I have clients now that have, not only are they, you know, maybe supporting their own children and grandchildren, but they themselves may be retired and have adult or parents that are in their 90s. So we're getting this caregiving sandwich generation phenomenon is going to be with us, I think, because as people are living longer and longer. And I think our generation is unique in that we have parents who are living a lot longer physically, but are suffering from some mental capacity challenges. And that, you know, creates a different set of requirements. So, and even, you know, we go back to that financial planning component, making sure that we understand the costs associated with, you know, caregiving, whether you want to be in a long-term care facility or staying at your home. All of those have some costs associated with it, and just making sure that your plans take that into account. And so, you know, on average, women, you know, spend or contribute basically 12 years looking after our families. So it's a significant portion of our lives.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I know.
So we've touched on some of these, but why we need a financial plan. So, I think if I was to sum this up, I would just say, because it gives you that sleep at night factor, that security of knowing, where you want to go. You've had that conversation with your significant partner, if you have one, and how you're going to get there. And I think that, that security of knowing that you can get to where you want to get to is I think the main reason why one wants to have it. So then in terms of, okay, so we talked about, what are some of the things you can do today? So we can even go to the next slide. There's 5 practical tips I'm going to give you today, because I'm all about
we love
being
the practical. Yeah.
Exactly. So I would like to encourage you to just take stock. So understand and do an inventory of your net worth, and I'll explain in the definition of what that means. Set long and short-term and even medium-term goals, and I'll give you some examples of what that means and what good goals might look like. Educate yourself and make it a habit. This is an industry which is full of acronyms and but take the time to make sure that you are increasing your own level of financial literacy. Develop a financial plan and ask for help. And I'll share some statistics as to why we think that's really, really important for women to do.
Yeah, Louise, I find it so interesting, just because having my daughter home she's in 3rd year university, and it's not like we actually always sit down and talk about financial things and money, but lately, she's showing some curiosity because she's in science. And now she's in a program where they are starting to take a few more business courses, but still not enough. And I said, understanding, just these terms and starting to think about your goals. Like, she does like to save, which is a good thing. But having that, comfort with educating yourself, getting into habits. So this is great. I'm going to have to make sure she watches the recording.
Sure. So, and first thing, understanding what your net worth is. So your net worth really simply is defined as what your assets and subtract your liabilities. So your assets would include things like any cash you have or any savings you have. So that could be in registered, so RSPs or TFSAs, or in a locked-in retirement account that you've had from a past employer. And it could include property, so your principal residence or an investment property, and subtracting from that your liabilities. So liabilities could be anything like a loan that you own to somebody, a line of credit, credit cards, and your mortgages. And that, if you do that, take your assets and subtract your liabilities, is your current net worth. So that's one thing we want to do. And the next thing we want on the next slide is to just take an inventory of your spending. It's funny because when I talk to my clients about planning for their retirement, I'll ask them, okay, what do you think you're spending on an annual basis? And then I will actually give them some tools to help them to measure this. And, in the media, they talk about, we typically say that, your income requirements in retirement, about 70% they are before you are retired. But I actually find that that's increasingly not the case, because we're so much healthier than our parents were, and our expectations are quite different. So when we can eventually travel, we kind of think about retirement in kind of 3 stages. There's your active retirement. So that's the point when you're maybe you retire at 65 or 68, and you travel a lot and you do a lot of active things, and you may decide you want to live in different places, and you're very active. And then at some point, your people's health starts to become not a big issue, but more of an issue, and you tend to want to be closer to home, and travel becomes a little more onerous. And so those are kind of the middle retirement years. And then often what will happen is sort of in the last stage, if you will, which increasingly is happening when people are well into their 80s. And that's when people are now facing, or 90s even, facing some sort of, more significant health decline, which requires that they be in some, have more care. And from an income perspective, we find that, at that first early, we're spending actually the same that we did when we were working, because you're spending money, you're traveling, you're doing all those things. That tends to go down in those middle retirement years, and it actually goes back up again because now we're paying more for care. So this activity is an important thing to think about. So you think about your income. So your income is comprised, when you're working, of your salary and any investment income. So what is investment income? Investment income comes if you have, for example, a non-registered account where you've got stocks and maybe bonds. So it'll come from dividends, and it comes from any capital gains, so the growth. So if a stock is trading at $80 and then all of a sudden it goes up to 100, that delta is a capital, what we call a capital gain. So that's your income. And then your expenses are going to be things for your housing, for your mortgage, any bills that you have, and entertainment that you have. So that's what you spend. So the residual is the delta. And I think this is an exercise that, one thing that we all have now, which our parents didn't, is we've got these wonderful phones, and online banking apps, which track actually quite a bit of our spending data, whether we like it or not. And, if you're someone who uses a credit card all the time or uses their debit card all the time, it's worth it to sit down and and it's pretty easy to do. And some banks actually break it out. I know ours does by type of, whether it's restaurants or, different areas of spending potential. And it breaks it down so you can kind of monitor it yourself and kind of do a bit of a test to say, this is what everybody knows what their income, or most people know sort of roughly what their income is, but it's always a bit of an aha moment to say, what are my expenses? And I would challenge all of you to really do that due diligence and exercise to really the analysis of what the expenses is. So I sometimes will ask my clients to say, what do you think it is? And then I give them some tools to help them to actually measure it. This is interesting. This is the one thing that people that go through a separation or divorce actually have to do. And, there's a lot of aha moments that come with that exercise. Absolutely.
It's funny you said that, because I've been looking at that lately, and, interesting with online banking and all these, applications now that, historically we couldn't do that. But now when you look at your credit card spend, it does break it down in the category. And then if you're wanting to pay it right away, so you're not paying interest, but you can set the budget. And I've tried that before, and I'm always over budget. So it's like, oh, okay, what am I spending my money on here? And sometimes you don't realize, like going into the holidays now, like honestly, sometimes I thought it's good to be simpler, because sometimes you spend this money. Do we really need all of this? I think if you start to really focus on it, you will probably find ways that you could save pretty easily.
Absolutely. So then in terms of goal setting, so, look, I'm not going to belabor this too much because it's something with which we're all familiar, but I think the important thing, we tend to write goals, I think sometimes we spend more time probably working on the goal setting for the companies we work for than we do for ourselves. And, and even we may set personal goals in terms of what we want to achieve, but we don't necessarily take the time to translate that into some financial goals. So, for example, some of the goals could be, your short-term goal could be, I want to go on a trip next summer, and I've got everything crossed that that's going to happen.
Yes.
Maybe a medium-term goal is, buying a second property, or, a long-term goal could be saving a certain amount for retirement over the next period of time. So, but it's important to actually write those down. It's important to think about and ask them, how am I going to get that? If I want to buy the second property, how am I going to do between now and 5 years from now to ensure that I have the assets to be able to actually get that second property? And then you have to reassess that, because, again, there are curveballs. There could be health issues, there could be life issues, there could be job disruption, so it may require that you reevaluate some of those medium and long-term goals realistically. And that's why, and we're going to talk about that, it's important to reassess those, I think, on an annual basis, to look at that and say, am I on track? And this is something that I do with my clients, and I can tell you the number of times where they said, yeah, I'm going to max out my TFSA, or yes, we're going to take some of the assets out of our corporation, and we're going to, invest them in, our children's trust fund, whatever that may be. And, it's always good for me to say, so this is what you told me you were going to do this year, and did we accomplish it? Did we do more? Did we do less? We look, going back to our conversation around net worth, we look at what their residual actually is, and if there should be more money and we're not seeing that going into the savings, which is one of their goals, then it's something that we can take a look at to say, okay, well, maybe something isn't correct here. So how do we need to change? Whether that's going back and looking at really how they're spending their money, or, changing some of the timelines associated with some of these goals. Because what can happen if you don't, track this, what can happen is, you may, because it's short term, sadly, we tend to be, especially, I think, increasingly very motivated on immediate gratification. So we tend to be focused more on the short term. And if we rob the medium term to pay for the short term, so our medium term goal may turn yellow, which will probably mean that our longer term goal isn't going to happen, because there's only a certain pot of money that we have. And if we use all of it to focus on that short and medium, there'll be less in the pot, sadly, for the longer term. So that's why that's all really important.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's so interesting, because I think too, depending on where you are in your life and your career and all of that, your goals will change, which is why it's important to look at that short, medium, long. I know when I first started out, I loved clothes. So when you start to finally get those paychecks working full time, you're like, oh, I get to go buy another outfit. And now, having been inside with the pandemic and casual, and it's interesting that you think, oh yeah, I used to spend a lot of money on that. That was not smart.
Yeah,
so,
no, it's true.
But reevaluating, and it's like that. And we're going into next year, so this is perfect timing, because, the last month of the year, trying to think about how do you want to start 2021, start thinking about all of the goals that you have, whether it's your physical health, whether it's, you want to get saved for that trip when it finally opens up, and or you could be starting out as a young couple wanting to buy your first home, and now, whether you're living in the city, but I always thought all that money that would go out to rent, oh my goodness, if you could find somehow to find the money to own a property, because the rent downtown Toronto, as an example, I was like, it's you could never afford it. So
yeah, and I think keeping it with that, I think that one of the other sad facts is that once one reaches, just on the other end of that spectrum, once one reaches a certain age, typically in one's 50s or some point in the 60s, the chance of disruption in your job increases, and sadly at the same time the chances of you finding another job becomes more difficult. And if we harken back to my point around the sandwich generation, and a disproportionate number of people, it's like 33% of women, people now are also supporting their elderly parents. So if you're sandwiched financially, and your own job situation or your own ability to fund your own retirement suddenly changes, and you're still supporting young people, your own children, and you're now faced with supporting your aging parents, that can become incredibly stressful for people. So I think that's why this planning, again, is really, really so important to understand that, and, because curveballs happen.
Yeah, this has been very helpful. Thank you.
So a little bit about education. Look, I'm a really big fan of financial literacy, and I'll talk about, share some sources as to where I think you can look for some of that. But, really, I think it's important to take the time to educate yourself on different products. So, more than once I've had, I have clients who are very sophisticated, and I have some who aren't as sophisticated, and I'm happy and love to work with all of them. And I have more than once heard a client say to me, well, I have a mutual fund, which is true. They could very much well have a mutual fund, but what they're really referring to is an RSP, right? So it's important to understand different products and the advantages and disadvantages and fit, quite frankly, in terms of what you're hoping to accomplish with respect to your financial future. So, for example, we talk about, diversification. So, and actually 90% of a portfolio, of the growth in the portfolio, is based really, quite frankly, on something called asset allocation, or how the assets are allocated across different asset classes. And mutual funds and ETFs can offer that diversification. So, for example, you can get an ETF that is just in Canadian equity, or just in US equity, or in small cap, and so on. There's thousands of mutual funds, and there are now thousands and thousands of ETFs. So really understanding what the difference is between those, and if they're going to meet your goals. So one thing, an ETF is traded on an exchange, and just like a stock. So I can look at my Thompson, which is my little screen, which you might be able to see behind me here, which has all the stocks, bonds, and also has ETFs. So they're traded daily, and I can therefore see the price at any point in time, and I can trade it at any point in time. And what that means is it provides liquidity, meaning if you need access to that money more quickly, an ETF in a stock can provide you with that greater degree of liquidity. There are fees associated with using a mutual fund and an ETF, but of course, if you're buying stocks, there's no fee associated with that. So just understanding and what are those fees, and how are the fees, what percentage are they? And the other thing is then understanding whether the ETF or the mutual fund is actively managed. So what that means is that, is there a team or an individual, a portfolio manager, who is actively looking at what's in that portfolio and making decisions in terms of what they include and what they trade on a regular basis. So a passively managed product would be something that follows an indexed ETF, for example, and that means that it's an ETF that is paired with, and there could be ones that are paired to the emerging markets exchange. There could be ones that are indexed to the S&P 500. There could be, so you want to understand. So, the issue or the reality of having an indexed fund, for example, in the last year, as the market, dipped down 30%, that ETF was following the volatility of the market, versus some of the actively managed ETFs and mutual funds. They may also have been impacted by the volatility, but they may also have had active management, which meant that the volatility was perhaps dampened, as an example.
I'm curious, Louise, it's interesting because I would think, and from a gender perspective, I'm curious, one of the co-op students that worked with us, and you may not have been on the session earlier this summer, but he's right into this stuff. Like he's invests, and he looks at stock market and everything. But I think, this is the point of, like, a lot of women that's not where they would start, right? They wouldn't start thinking about what are all these other options for me to invest in, unless their organization is offering it. For example, when I was at CIBC, they had a stock option, like a employee stock purchase plan, which is fantastic. And so if you are with a company, you might have that option, and then you're not even taking advantage of it because you don't realize.
Yeah,
it's so amazing. And I tell you, the stock value, like just me taking a little bit from each of my pay for me to invest, in addition to any awards I might have got from a bonus compensation and things like that. And so you might have exposure then, but I would say a lot of people don't know where to begin, you know? And so this is a great overview on even all the different types of things, because I think people, you know, unless you're taking business degrees or you're in the business world, you know, so many professions, you're not even looking at any of this.
Yeah, and one of the things I'll share with people is, you know, just asking for help, and where can you go for help, and the different kinds of people that can, different types of roles that can be actually providing that help and guidance.
Amazing.
So then in terms of where else you can be looking for some education, you know, oh, sorry, not quite there yet. Oh. Just in terms of we've been talking, no, it's okay. You can keep going. I was just thinking of a different slide. But, you know, you've been talking, and Helen, about, you know, the importance of investing early. And this is, you know, what we call the power of compounding investment. So, you know, what is compounding? It's really the earnings. So and that could be from capital gains, which you talked about. So that's the delta between what a stock is worth now and how it goes up to. Or it could be interest. So if you buy a bond, you can get interest. And those, or dividends. So that is reinvested into the your portfolio, and it just grows over time. So we've given an example here. We've got John and Susan. So, you know, they both contribute for 10 years. But the difference is that John starts earlier. So he's actually invested for 20 years over Susan's 10. And even if Susan contributes more over that shorter period of time, at the end of that time period, John still has more money saved. And that's because of the miracle of investing in compounding interest.
Wow, that's a great visual and that example. Because, I mean, she put in double. She contributed double, yet that's amazing.
Yeah, so I often, you know, when talking to young people, I say, don't wait, because what sometimes people will think, oh, I need to, before I start, you know, saving for my retirement, or we want to buy a house. And I get the pressure of, you know, the housing market in most major cities in Toronto, in Canada at least, it's really tough for young people to step into their first home. But a couple things. One is, you know, that you can take advantage of the one-time home buyers plan through your RSP. So that allows now $35,000 that you can contribute to the down payment of your home. And the other thing is, even if it's a small, relatively small portion, it's getting into that habit of diverting some of your pay on a regular basis into your RSP and into your TFSA. And, you know, if you don't ever see it, if it happens at the same day that your pay arrives in your into your checking account, and it just goes out the same day into your RSP or your TFSA, you don't even feel it really, and you just don't get used to having that extra X number of dollars on a regular basis. But it means it's going to have big impact. You're going to be so grateful when you're ready to retire, and you do have the funds to be able to do so.
Yes, there's so much for that forced savings, or pay yourself first, right? Or just take it off and you never see it, and then it can start growing. That's great.
Yeah. So the other thing that, you know, sometimes people say, oh, it's not a good time. So, you know, over the last year, I've often heard people say, oh, should we go to cash? Should we, you know, what should we do? And, you know, here's the reality. Nobody, and if they say they do know, they're lying, because it's impossible to know. Nobody can time the market. And what we're just trying to show you here is that if you were to invest $20,000 just on the eve of when the market took had a significant drop, you still would have, you know, over $300,000 saved. So you can't time it. So this is this concept of just continuing to contribute to your savings all the time is why we keep stressing that, because you really can't time the market.
What do you think about borrowing to invest? And then, you know, how some people may, you know, they may not have that lump sum available, but they may borrow at a low interest rate and then invest. And then I mean, that might be a little complicated, but
No, I mean, I think it's a very, so, you know, look, I I don't think it's not a bad strategy for the right person. By that, I mean, you know, if you have the means to be able to. So I have clients that do that, but in most cases, those clients have the asset. So in other words, they're borrowing to invest, but they have what they have borrowed, so that if anything, there was a catastrophic event, they can actually pay that loan back fairly easily. Look, yes, it's very tempting and to borrow, especially when interest rates are so low. I'm a little more conservative, so I tend to say to people, look, you don't want to do that with money that you can't cover, because you never want to get into a situation, because interest rates are low, and I suspect they will stay low for the next number of years. At least that's what our analysts are saying. But you know, that might change, and you don't want to be, or you could have, you know, you could lose your job. There could be things that happen. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're not able to pay that back with funds that you have on hand. So.
Yeah. And I think the main thing is trying not to have debt, right? Like thinking back again when I started and having student loans, and just like it hung over me for so long, and I just wanted to get those out of the way so quickly. And you do what you do, right? But I think, you know, one of the big lessons is really trying to save. Like even with the crisis this year, you know, if you all of a sudden were laid off and you didn't have that, like, you know, that bit of savings, you know, you might be getting employment insurance, but that's not very much, right? And so, you know, to have some kind of savings, you know, accumulated that you can rely on for your expenses. So this has been very, very valuable. And I think about women, you know, you need to learn this early, I think. Like for me, I would love to see it, you know, even taught in elementary school, as opposed to just, junior achievers coming in or something in grade 8, right? It'd be like
I think they're starting to teach it. I agree with you, but I think that, you know, because we haven't taught it, we don't teach it in schools. You know, this is one of those things where I think people learn from their parents, because there's no other, or from, you know, listening to the media or whatever. And I think we have to make learning a habit. I think we have to take a proactive step, no matter what stage of life and where you are. And there's lots of ways we can do that. Like RBC has a very strong relationship with David Chilton, who's the author of The Wealthy Barber. And, you know, we have some great, like, little vignette videos, which are really digestible podcasts for you to get some really valuable information, but it's worth the read. It's very easy, and the message is really straightforward, simple, but very powerful. And then there's other, you know, I've shared just to be bank agnostic, but, you know, TD has a Money Talks, you know, which is great. We've got a similar platform as well. You know, there's certainly lots of podcasts. I think Money Sense is a great magazine. I think it's really just taking the time. I certainly am going to encourage my children to both take the Canadian Securities Institute, the first, you know, level of that, because I just think that there's value in having a basic understanding. I made them take accounting, much to their chagrin, in high school, so that I'm a little bit flummoxed when I get a business owner who doesn't really understand balance sheets and just some of the basic fun, and sort of acquiesce that. They like, oh, I just do whatever it is they do, and they don't really have a good handle on their company's financial situation. And then this is going to sound really harsh, but I just don't think that's acceptable. I don't think, you know, because you can find your business in a really precarious situation, and you don't have to know everything, but you need to know which questions to ask.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, is I think that, I mean, these are great. I love these resources. I did see one of David Chilton's, a little podcast or something about interesting about your assets too, like your marketing assets and things like that. So beyond the finances is like, if you have all your social media accounts, like it was kind of interesting, that whole planning for when you exit, which is not a great topic, but, for some people who may have trademark assets or other things that are out in the social media, like it's kind of connected to, right? They might be worth something, who knows? But the resources is good, like having some podcasts or just simple things like Katie took accounting. Colin will definitely take it. She's going to take it again as part of it, but I took it when I was in college or something. And I work a lot with the HR Professional Association. And one of the things for that designation, it's interesting, there's not this finance part, but there has been a real push for HR professionals to have more financial acumen. So it's all linked to like reading balance sheets, also understanding your own money. And I think getting that into that comfort with the money mindset and talking about it, because it's sort of been taboo for so long, right? People, it's apparently, I think our last guest was talking about statistics of, people like to talk about sex and politics more than money. Interesting.
And I think that's part of, women, we tend to look after everybody else, but this is about looking after ourselves. And, we say, you look after yourself. And this to me is part of looking after yourself.
Now, this is fantastic. I'm going to definitely check out a couple of those resources myself.
So then my fourth practical tip is to develop a written financial plan. So it has to be written because it's going to not only, it needs to define how you will save and invest to meet your goals. So, this goes, if you have a goal of X hundreds of thousands of dollars, how are you going to get from zero to hundreds of thousands between now and then? So how are you going to do that? So if one of your goals is to retire when you're 60 and buy a house and when you're 32 and you've got all these money, you want to do all these things. Well, how are you going to do that? Because you're not going to, not to say those aren't possible, but you need to know what you need to contribute on a monthly basis to get to this. So that's the how. And then if you have that means that actually those things are going to happen. Because if you have those written down and when you back into how you're going to get there, you're going to actually get to it, which is great, right? So then you can go to bed at night knowing, okay, I'm going to get to my goal, which is to have my house when I'm 35, or to have my cottage when I'm 42, whatever those goals are. You also want to make sure that you're protecting everybody in your family from the unexpected, because life does throw you curveballs. We certainly had the biggest curveball ever this year, right? So making sure that you've got, and that, you mentioned, Helen, having some money, a little bit of money saved. So, typically there's 6 months of income saved, and so that you can access it if you need to. But it also means things like having a will, having insurance. So there's lots of pieces that need to be in place to making sure that your family is going to be looked after if you have any of those curveballs that happen to you. So then the last thing my last piece of advice is just around ask for help. So, there's some real reasons why you want to ask for help. So, there's a statistic that we have, which is people that have asked for help are almost 4 times, we're going to have 4 times more the assets in 15 years than those that have not. So I have this actually, Helen, on the next slide. And 56% of advised, meaning households that have some form of advisor, they feel more confident. And what does confidence mean? It means that, I keep saying the sleep at night factor, but it just means that, you can take that worry ball and put it over here, and you can, manage the other balls that we all as women juggle on a daily basis. And finally, and I think this is important, 87% felt like, okay, I'm going to be okay in my retirement. And I think that's really valuable, because it's, you've worked hard all your life, and you want to make sure you're able to enjoy the fruits of your labor. So then there's different options for help. You can do it yourself, and, certainly, while some of those statistics I just shared do all that, I think, initially when you're really, really, young and starting out, I think there in some ways there is value of, going two ways: doing it yourself, so you force yourself to become educated, but not doing it at all is not an option. Or working, if your parents or your family are working with an advisor who you like and trust, you know, work with them and learn from them. And you know, I have, you know, started with some of my clients' children. I've opened up TFSAs, and we work together, and we have little lessons around, you know, and these are really bright women that are, you know, either coming to the end or close to the end of their university education. And, you know, it's, I love, you know, working with them to help them to, you know, navigate through and make sure that they understand, and there's no dumb questions, right? So that's the beauty of that. But, you know, doing it yourself is an option. Working with a financial advisor or financial planner. So an advisor would be somebody that you'd find at the branch. So if you walk into any of the major banks into the branch, there'd be a financial advisor who would be able to do some planning and to help you. And then the nuance there is a financial advisor will invest your assets, but they will be limited at the branch level to invest in mutual funds, so that they'll provide you with that broad diversification. Nothing wrong with that, certainly, but that's a good stepping stone into this world of saving. And then a financial planner is somebody whose job it is to do the planning component. So that's to help you with those goal setting and actually create the plan for you. Or you can work with an investment advisor. So the nuance there is investment advisors, we look at it more broadly. So we tend to look at wealth and consider all of your wealth. So that to me includes, yes, your investments, but it also includes thinking about your estate planning, looking at your insurance needs, you know, sort of looking at your business if you own a business. So looking at the whole part of wealth. So those are kind of the different options, but, you know, going back to that statistic, I think I would encourage everybody to just ask for help, because the statistics tell us that those who seek and get help are more likely to reach their goals, and quite frankly, more likely to have saved more in the long run.
Amazing. Wow.
So I just wanted to say thank you to Helen. It was very kind of you to invite me today, and I really appreciate the time, and it's been a delight.
I'm glad I asked a few questions. This was amazing, Louise. And the recording will be available. As I said, I will be sharing it with my networks, with my list, with you know, on social, because it was such an amazing presentation and so much information. And also I love that you kind of can simplify it a bit, because it can get as complex as you want to, right? But to actually be able to just, hey, start small, just start, right? When you think about it.
Yeah, just start. You know, when everybody this year, to your point, you know, we're all going to be setting goals, and just make sure you're setting financial ones. And, you know, if you haven't got some help, just pick up the phone, walk in the door, get help.
Yeah, and is there now? I know we only had a couple people join today, but I'm wondering if anyone here's thank you. Oh, thank you. Your information's here, and I will share it again with my newsletter list and you know, in my community. Does anyone have a last question that I know I asked a lot of questions because I'm sure that a lot of people had, you know, some questions that I have, maybe others had, but I just thought I'd open it up. I know Jennifer was on. Is there anything specifically that anybody would like to ask? And I was going to say
too, that if because I find when we do this, the one thing I found about it, because I've done a lot of these, as I know you have too, Helen, but people tend to be a bit shy. Yeah. But I was just going to say that if anybody does have a question, by all means, please send me an email, and I'm more than happy to answer those. I'd love that.
That's great. I'm just going to stop the share for a second. So I think it's just a couple. Sometimes I hide the ones that aren't video as well, but it doesn't look like there's any questions in the chat. I was just looking, and I can't believe we went right to the 1 hour, which is amazing. We had that was so valuable. I think that, you know, my advice is really, you know, sometimes I wish I had a little bit more when I was younger, but I really feel like, you know, young professionals starting out, women, need to get more comfortable with talking about money. And also just, you know, from my perspective, you know, my own personal situations is that every life event, you know, try to get out in front of that. And even now at this stage where I get to have fun, I'm thinking about all that travel I might get to do if I ever, if I retire. And I still have Cullen in grade 8. So, but I think this was great. It doesn't look like there's any questions, and I don't want to keep you. I don't know if you have meetings or anything like that, but I would love to have you again. I mean, this was something I did in 2020, and really just sharing it going forward as well, because you can watch this at any time, right? And I love the work you do, and I love that you're also doing these other events so people can follow you on.
Yeah, I do. We have a Women for Women series that we do, which is pretty amazing. So we cover off other aspects of our lives. So we always have one. We do them on a quarterly basis. We always have one event focused on financial, you know, whether it's market update or, which is, you know, I've done for your you know, as part of your you know, things that you do. But the other areas that we focus on are nutrition. So we're actually doing one that's later tonight on, we've got a woman who is the owner of Nut Bar, and she's just talking about how you can use nutrition to, in terms of your own boosting your immune system, which, you know, as we're heading into cold season, is very helpful. And then I think the other areas, like we have a little fun. So we've had people talking about different wines that you can, you know, sommeliers on, entertaining and how you can do it in a fun way when we're all in COVID. So just different, you know, so women's health, we've had people talking about being in the sandwich generation and, you know, just explaining the different options for care. So lots of interesting areas. I think our first one in January is going to be about technology and which areas of technology. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, that, you know, tech is changing all the time too. You have to get comfortable with that. Well, I am going to probably close it off, and I just want to say thanks again for taking the time. The presentation was fantastic. I'm so glad that we have we've met. We're involved in SheEO together. There are so many ways to give back, and I know that you do that a lot. And that, you know, I just love your energy. And I'm looking forward to finishing the year. I'm going to take some time off. I have a couple more weeks of things to do. And then by mid-December, the 18th or something, I really want to take 2 or 3 weeks off and just relax and enjoy family, even though it's going to be a quiet Christmas in our house. We're home. We're usually away. But I would love to, you know, keep in touch. I will send out the presentation, and it'll be available on my website, and the recording will be on YouTube. And so I'll share that with you and anybody else. And then for those, our next and final session for the year is on December 10th. And we're actually have Hilda Gann, who's from People Bright Consulting, and we do a lot of work together, and we do similar work, but one of her primary focus is helping, she has a program called Rev Up, which is really towards managers and helping them gain skills to be effective managers. And we thought it's a good time to kind of revisit mission, vision, and values, like for an organization, or purpose or passion, whatever you call it. But also I loved what you did about your story as, like, you know, we all need our own personal why as well. And so as an entrepreneur, you can have, you know, your why, but your personal why, your corporate why, and then organizations, really, I feel like employees will be more grounded and understand where they're going if they have it. And so to revisit that and then get into planning for 2021. So it'll be a good session. So once again, thank you. And I'm going to end the call, but I wish you and your family well for the holidays and into the new year.
Thank you too, Helen.
And hopefully this pandemic may end, but, you know, just stay the course, and anybody can reach out to Louise, and I will see everybody soon. So thanks again.